cross-cultural communication rhythm and how that affects us in our conference calls and during our meetings. I'd like to share a case of a manager I've been coaching here in China. He has team members in North America, Western Europe, Latin America, and of course, here in Asia. He reports that when they come together for meetings and conference calls, there's often inefficiencies. One group talks more than another, one group speaks far less, people get covered up, people feel frustrated and unhappy. I think for many of us who've worked in intercultural teams before, this shouldn't be a surprise. This happens more than we'd like to admit. One of the things that we'd like to look at today is a case study that I shared with him, and I'd like to share with you, that's very helpful in understanding why some of these inefficiencies occur. This comes from Franz Trompenaar's book, Riding the Waves of Culture, and looks at how 3 different groups have 3 different rhythms and how that plays out in meetings. Let's take a look at an animation of these 3 groups. In the first group, let's call them Group A, we have North America and Western Europe. If you look at this pattern that emerges, you'll notice that typically when they're calling each other, we have 2 people on the line with roughly equal talk times and small gaps in between each person talking. We traditionally call this model turn-taking. When we ask participants from these 2 groups why people have this rhythm in Group A, they often said this turn-taking pattern is a way that we show respect. We show respect in this case by not talking over the other person and by showing that we're as interactive between both people speaking at the same length of time. Looking at Group B, Japan and East Asia, we see some things are similar to Group A. We see 2 people speaking, we see turn-taking, no overlap, and we see gaps between when people talk, short pauses. Except now, these pauses are much longer. And we'll notice the person represented in orange speaks much less than the person represented in blue. In fact, when we asked why they had this rhythm, participants said it's once again because of respect. And this respect here might represent the seniority of the facilitator in blue and the time spent for thinking with these long pauses to indicate that we are paying attention to what the other person is saying. Group C, Brazil and Latin America. You'll notice a new pattern comes out here, very different from Group A and Group B, in which there's definitely overlap, and in which turn-taking, as we saw before, doesn't follow the same pattern. The person who speaks at the beginning is not necessarily the person who speaks at the end. When asked about why they had this rhythm, participants once again said it showed respect. And what we notice here is that respect for Group A, Group B, and Group C all has different definitions. I had a chance to meet with senior leaders from Group C before, and they said this kind of respect comes from being passionate and interactive with each other. It comes from treating each other as equals, because when you're equal, you can interrupt each other. So when we look at this, we see that communication rhythms are often tied to what we believe is the right way to communicate and what's the respectful way to communicate. After learning about why they had this rhythm, we went back and asked the participants, what would you do with this information? How would you make changes? They often, through their own experience, suggested what they thought would be the best way. Let's take a look at a summary of these suggestions from both Group A, B, and C. Group A emphasized speaking out, preparing with the agenda, and being ready to ask questions. Group B emphasized space for listening, a clear chairperson, and having a clear time for each person to speak. Whereas Group C emphasized preparation, interaction, and actively showing an interest in the topic. When we take a look at this, we realize that each group is making suggestions based on what they already think is important to do. This is one of our important lessons, is that this idea of being respectful, this idea of doing it the right way, comes from our own cultural norms. So this seems like a good time for us to step back and look at some simple theory about cross-culture and how we can apply this to our communication. Let's take a look at 4 simple principles to help us understand things. Number 1, communication norms or patterns are taught and learned from an early age as the right way to communicate. Which leads us to number 2. My right way and your right way are not necessarily the same way, meaning we can have multiple rights and wrong ways. Number 3, most cultures emphasize a way to be respectful to others. And as we said before, what they emphasize may be different. Finally, we typically look for solutions that make sense from our own cultural norms, and as a result, we may miss out on what others need. In other words, we give advice based on what we would do, but that doesn't necessarily help people from what they would do. Let's take a look at how we would approach giving advice or giving suggestions in a more complete or holistic way. The first place I'd like to start is what we do when we bring all these teams together. What's our standard process? Not just individual actions, but what we as a team want to start to do differently. Let's look at some suggestions for teams A, B, and C, regardless of who's in the meeting. Suggestions for all groups included using more functions like chat windows, white screen, and video, having agendas and reading materials sent out 48 hours in advance, planning short segments to keep people engaged and visible, sharing introductions to participants in advance of meetings so that everyone would know each other, and importantly, rotating the facilitator role to encourage meeting ownership among the different regions. By looking at these different areas, we see opportunities for everyone to become more involved. There are also specific suggestions for if these groups are working together. For example, Group A working with Group B, Group A with C, and B with C. Let's take a look at a couple of suggestions in each of these categories. Let's look at Group A and Group B working together first. With Group A and Group B together, you'll notice we have suggestions such as being able to manage that silence a little bit more effectively, becoming comfortable with an awkward silence, commonly a problem with Group A, and reducing some of the spontaneity of spontaneous brainstorming and Q&A. With Group B, the emphasis here is making sure to create some space for thinking by saying things like, let me think about that, or preparing key questions and key things to share in advance of the meeting. These solutions are specific to who they're working with the idea that each group is going to have unique challenges or unique areas that they're going to want to work through. Let's continue looking, this time with Group A and C, and you'll notice that some of those specific suggestions, again, are tailored to the person they want to be understanding and adapting to. Looking at Group A and C, we see Group A, for example, has suggestions to get involved in socialization, plan to frequently share their opinion, and in the case of Group C, to be mindful of this turn-taking culture we mentioned, to avoid talking over colleagues, and to use the agenda to make sure that topics are managed appropriately and sharing happens when it should happen. Finally, that takes us to our last group. Of course, if we have all three groups together, we would hope that we see Group A, B, and C lending these suggestions. But let's look at Group B and C, probably the furthest apart of these three groups. Looking at Group B and C, we see suggestions similar to what we saw for some of Group A, for example, getting involved in socialization, but also some new issues, such as planning to use verbal expression more clearly to share opinions, act as if you have a roundtable with each person speaking out. In the case of Group C, we've suggested a new idea of a parking lot. If there's good ideas that don't fit within this meeting, to bring them back up later, and to also take advantage of roundtable sharing to make sure that each person has a chance to bring out their opinions for later. What we see by looking at these different suggestions is that rather than making a broad suggestion from one cultural point of view, we're looking at specific adaptive strategies based on what we can learn from their rhythms. Now, when we think of adaptive strategies, this is also a good opportunity for us to think of where else we can apply this to. It's a good opportunity for us to think about how we give feedback, how we give coaching, our performance evaluation discussions, and of course, if we're going to be looking to have our networking and social opportunities, we want to be looking for the rhythms that come out when we're trying to meet and work with new people. As always, I want to leave you with a few key tips, a checklist, if you will, on what you can do taking back. Our checklist, as always, has three key parts: what to identify, what to understand, and what to begin to adapt to. Let's take a look at our three-part checklist for this topic. As meetings begin, take a moment to identify how long colleagues wait before speaking out and look for consistent rhythms throughout the meeting. Next, seek to understand why those rhythms occur by asking questions: How does this show good and respectful communication from my colleague's point of view? And finally, first seek to adapt yourself to the rhythm by speeding up or slowing down, then look to see if the meeting process can be improved to balance these cultural differences. I hope these tips are going to be helpful for you as you go back to work and working with your colleagues. Obviously, communication rhythm isn't something you're going to solve in a day, but if you're aware of it and you're looking to adapt, I'm sure you'll see progress in no time. Thanks for coming in and listening with us today. I look forward to sharing with you further in other videos, and of course, seeing you in person if you decide to join one of our round tables out throughout China. Thanks, and bye-bye!